And Sarah, obviously you've been listening to every word today. Would you say that Harry was as composed today as he was yesterday? Yesterday he spoke sometimes so quietly that journalists needed to ask him to speak up so they could hear him. Today, did he seem to lose his rag a bit more?
The volume was definitely better today, and he started off interrupting Andrew Green, Casey, the Mirror's barrister, with a "Good morning, Mr. Green," and started off very confidently. There were a number of occasions during his evidence where he had to answer, I don't know, or I don't remember that. At the end, as you heard, he said he was asked how it had been to be in the witness box, knowing that the world's media were watching him, and he said it's a lot, and he sat down. I think he'll be pretty relieved it is over now, because it was a gruelling experience for him. And I think he remained relatively composed throughout. There were a few tetchier moments. He had a slight clash with Andrew Green over what constituted private life and public life, whether just because you were in the army that meant that everything was in the public interest. And he was reminded by the barrister that it was his job to ask the questions and not Harry's. At the end, we saw him become really impassioned as he realised his time in the witness box was coming to an end. He kind of had this plea, turned to the judge and he said, "My lord, my whole life the press have misled me, covered up their wrongdoing. To be sitting here in court knowing the defence has the evidence in front of them," and lawyer Andrew Green saying, "I'm speculating. I'm not entirely sure what to say about that," because it was said to him again on a couple of occasions today that you're in the realms of total speculation. And he was very, very impassioned about that. We learnt why he brought the case as well, how this all came about, and that was quite fascinating. He didn't make contact with his lawyer, David Sherburn, in the first place. He met him by chance on holiday in France in 2018. And that is how the case came into being. And there was some indication about the motivation for it as well. He said that my wife and I, he said it was about the abuse and the intrusion that they had experienced and whether or not there was another course of action rather than relying on the institutions. Lawyers, of course, they were still members of the royal family at that stage.
I suppose the judge will be having to think about whether abuse was part of it, but whether what Prince Harry interprets as abuse from a newspaper is actual legal free speech without a newspaper obtaining anything by any sort of nefarious means, and therefore newspaper entitled to have opinions and views and have journalists and columnists with all sorts of views which may be considered to be very wounding by Harry and by Meghan, but where there's no criminal involvement of any sort in any way.
But on the subject of nefarious means, there was an interesting exchange with the judge right at the end, where the judge asked him about, why he thinks his phone was hacked, and Harry had talked about messages disappearing or not knowing that there were voicemail messages, and people asking him, "Did you get my voicemail?" He didn't, and the little envelope icon disappearing. And he said he felt that had been going on every day for the 15 years and certainly could have been. And he also talked about the impact on others who have been brought up in this case, notably and most prominently Chelsea Davy, his former girlfriend. He said, "My past girlfriend has her own life and her own family now, and this is just as distressing for her as it is for me," because, of course, we've had details of their relationship, the highs and the lows, particularly today, talking about the breakdown of that relationship.
I wonder how Chelsea Davy feels about it. I mean, we probably will never know because she's been amazingly discreet throughout, hasn't she? And we don't know, but I mean, she has moved on and she has got her own life and she didn't want to be a part of this.
She's married to a Norfolk hotelier, she's got a baby, she's getting on with her own life and she's never spoken out.
But I think lots of people feel that they have been casualties of Prince Harry's urge or desire or whatever it is to bare his soul and tell everybody of all his different sufferings. And this might be, for example, the woman to whom he lost his virginity, who said, "I would never, ever have spoken about this. It wasn't anything I ever wanted anyone to know about me. But as soon as the book came out, everybody put me together with it, so I might as well speak out because everyone knows it's me," that kind of a thing. And you might think Chelsea Davy might feel very much the same. She might think, gosh, we lived through it then. It was bad enough then. We don't need to rehash the whole thing now.
Yeah, and certainly on what they lived through. I mean, Harry was keen to point out just how difficult it was for them. He said today in court that he found a tracking device on her car. He talked about voicemail messages that they may have exchanged at the time their relationship was going through a very difficult patch. There were reports in the press about him begging her to stay with him, frantic calls between them. He said that it can only have been obtained by unlawful means, that her mobile phone number had been found on the Palm Pilots of journalists. He talked about the use of private investigators, for example. But yes, that was then, and this is all coming back into the headlines again today as a result of this case.
And so he was asked, wasn't he, by the Mirror's KC, do you want your phone to have been hacked? Which is a very strange question, is it? Do you want your phone to have been hacked? In other words, are you here because you so want it to be true that you're absolutely putting yourself on the line, putting the royal family into a position it hasn't been in for 130 years, because you're eager that the result should be, yes, I was hacked?
Yeah, would you be disappointed if this court found you hadn't been hacked? And he said, well, you know, he thought there had been industrial scale hacking, and so effectively he would be disappointed if the court found that way. And he was saying, and then he was asked, well, do you want your phone to have been hacked? And he said, no, of course, nobody wants their phone to have been hacked.
I think that the truth is, from all the people I know who have been in that position and whatever experience I may or may not have had, that it's not that you want your phone to have been hacked, but what you really want is to know how lots of people knew things about you that you didn't know they knew, and you know that you weren't the vehicle of communication. So at least it would be, it's not closure, but at least it would give a kind of factual explanation, I suppose.
Well, it's interesting because he says when he was made aware of the possibility of phone hacking, although it was awful, he almost felt some sort of relief that it wasn't necessarily those closest to him, that he had doubted and then shut down that circle and become very insular, that it wasn't necessarily that he didn't need to have been so suspicious about the people that were closest to him had there been unlawful means of getting that information. But what he's got to prove here is that in these 33 cases that he has cited that have been selected for these test cases effectively, that what he says was intrusion was obtained unlawfully and there weren't other means.
And what you've been telling me is that if he can prove it in just one case of the 33 or whatever it is, just one or maybe one or two, that will be a vindication, that will be enough. That way he will feel as if he has a victory. That's all he's really looking for. It doesn't have to be all of them, it just has to be a couple of them.
Look, I think this is, Harry wants a moral victory here. He wants to hold the media to account. And, OK, in his world, all of these and more, 148 articles that he claims were obtained, he believes, by unlawful means, 33 here. Look, he wants to win all of them, obviously. But if just 1, 2, 3 or 4, a handful of these, if it is found that they were obtained by hacking, by blagging, then he will be able to say, I was a victim of hacking as a result of the British tabloid press. And that is a vindication then.
And you don't think it makes any difference that so many prominent people, so many people have been hacked at various points, and it's been going on for years, that you know, OK, all right, nobody will be that moved by it? Or do you think it will make an enormous difference?
I think he sees this as his quest, and that others don't necessarily have the deep pockets that he has to follow this through, and that he does have a position and a platform in which he can stand up, and he sees this very much as him standing up for the little guy, I suppose. Whether or not it works out, and as he said, you know, he's quite busy with the litigation at the moment, and it's very expensive, as we know. So it's not going to be easy, as he's found over the course of the last day and a half, and he's got a while to wait.
Thank you very much indeed. More